All right, we got another one on the way. Pick another question.
I can sort of see. No, I'm kidding. kidding. There you go.
All right. Ooh. Franchisee versus franchisor. Is it truly a partnership? Where does the power lie?
Wow, that's a loaded one.
I know. We're about to ruffle some feathers, get a little hot in here.
Okay. So I will say it's not mutually exhaustive.
Okay.
Both have power.
Okay.
How they enact the power, the thing for me is for it not to be a struggle. Because, obviously the franchisor sets the business model and the franchisee has ways they can interpret and enact that business model to a limit. Obviously there's the franchise agreement, but they have some power within that too. Yes. So it's really, how are they enacting those powers unilateral or together, I should say, for the best of the model. So my short answer is the power lies with both, but how are they communicating to go forward, in the same direction?
Yeah, I often like to think of the franchise model as this web and this ecosystem of people and processes that come together to build a brand, right? And within that ecosystem is the franchisor, is the franchisee, is the supply chain, and then all the extensions of that, right? And so the one piece that I think is important to bring light to is acknowledging that there is a power dynamic in the room. There is a power dynamic in the relationship. Franchisors obviously hold a certain power dynamic. It's in the name, franchisor, franchisee, which is why I typically like to use franchise partners. You'll hear that interchangeably throughout the conversations. But there's a dynamic there, and labels matter, and titles matter, and words matter. And so I always like to quote Spider-Man, with great responsibility. Sorry, I started again. I always like to quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And when you walk into a room and you know that you're holding a certain level of power, I believe it's your responsibility to lead conversation, to lead change, to lead and create an environment where people feel safe to show up, feel good to show up, where you can have healthy and constructive conversation. And so I think there's some work to do sometimes in the franchise model and the way people operate and businesses operate, where, yes, you can make a decision, you can lead a strategy. We're not taking that power away from you as a franchisor, but acknowledge that there's some power at play and be proactive and intentional with your communication and with your effort to bridge that connection and make it a comfortable and thriving environment for everyone.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I go a little more PR with it.
Okay.
In the sense that
What's PR? What do you mean PR?
PR, where it's more about rules, right? It's like anything else. Power, when you say the word power, it's when it becomes abusive. When you're enacting rules just because. When a franchisee buys into business, there's a FA and there's rules and guidelines and stuff like that. Adherence to the rules that you've understood or sometimes not understood. And that's sometimes the biggest part of the problem, because, a new entrepreneur coming into a business doesn't really understand.
There's some things you can't understand until you get in there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when we say power, when, I like to use that very narrowly, is when a franchisor becomes abusive with it. And that sometimes happens, like, let's say somebody, I'll use an example of an FA where, a franchisee is supposed to be in their unit 40 hours a week, but they have an illness in the family. And the franchisor says, well, you're not there, and they want to oust them because of whatever political reason. That's power, right? Now, when there's an AWOL, let's say franchisee, just because he wants a vacation and the business is failing, and they use that same guideline to oust that person, there's a different dynamic there. So, guardrails, regulations, for me, it's okay because the business model has to be the business model for the best of all. It's when the power becomes abusive. And I think that's the real question here, because we've seen that too many times where it becomes abusive for the interest of one stakeholder rather than,
looking at the whole ecosystem.
Right. So, that's why I'm saying it works both ways, because again, from the franchisee perspective, playing that side of the coin, they have certain abilities to act autonomously as well.
Yes.
Which may not be in the best interest. So, for example, some brands don't have regulations on price setting.
Right.
And, COVID was a big one where I've seen franchisee undercut their other franchise partners, and it was just disastrous. So they're enacting that power to the, not for the benefit of other franchisees and those types of things. So, for me, it's always important to term, power in the sense that we're talking about it as when it becomes abusive, not regulatory.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're exploring the word power in a few different ways. And I think that's really important for this conversation. Right. I touched on, titles and words and how that kind of plays into the dynamic. You touched on abuse of power and how that sometimes trickles down, and when you're not considering other stakeholders or the ecosystem in decision making. Right. And I think another piece on the power is the power of influence.
Yes.
The power of who holds the power to influence the reputation of the brand. And at the end of the day, franchisors do, obviously, with things like leading strategy, but franchisees do as well, because they are the piece that executes that strategy.
Yes.
And brand consistency is all about how we lead strategy, but also how we execute that strategy, right? And so what steps or what trends or what systems do you see today being used to help create a more balanced approach to building brands through distribution of power or through communication channels that help, I guess, bring both people to the table, both sides to the table?
Right. So, we talked about communication, because, both, like you said, both the franchisor and the franchisees have a part to play. Franchise partners have a part to play in keeping the business model on point to the benefit of all. Now, another hot topic will be the FAC.
Yes.
Because the brands that have...
so for our viewers who don't know what an FAC is, what is an FAC?
Go ahead.
No, I want you to explain. You brought it up, so you can explain.
What's an FAC? It's a franchise council, basically.
Franchise Advisory Council.
Right.
Yeah.
It's basically made up of franchisees or sometimes different elements within the brand to be an advisory to the franchisor from both sides to develop challenges and new innovative stuff for the brand.
Yes.
So that's really what that is.
Yeah.
When that is working well, communication is great. So that's one of the things that, I would advise to look at is how that is functioning. When that's not working well, it's sort of a microcosm to the macro that's going on in the brand, because it really is a tell on how the brand is developing, positively or negatively, and who is the power broker, if you want to really say, because you can have a lot of truth come out in those FACs.
So my experience with FACs or franchise advisory councils is a little bit limited in some ways. I've worked with brands that utilize the group effectively to ensure that there's a feedback loop between franchisor and franchisee. Where I've seen it work well is when it's an elected group of folks, not just someone who people who were just handpicked by the guy at the top. I've seen it work well there. I've seen it work well when there's an established system and process for collecting feedback and delivering feedback. When you put a council together and you don't have a clear objective and you don't have a clear process in place that explains to everyone why you're there and what you hope to achieve, it can easily become what it's not intended to be, right? It can become a place where people just talk about their woes. It can be a place where, franchisor might not be in a place where they feel that they need to hear the voice of the franchisee, or they feel they have a pulse on it already through their business coaches or whatnot. I'd like to see councils like, the FAC or groups or whatever, like the FAC, come together more consistently with franchise brands. And if not that, if you're not trying to do something so official, just putting something in place so that there is a way to have a feedback loop between the franchisor and the franchisee, whether that's engagement surveys, whether that's newsletters, whether that's quarterly calls, or twice a year calls that brings everyone together and they have a space to share their feedback and be heard. Because I'm sure you would agree, as a business coach, a lot of the times when you're dealing with underperformance, disengagement, or even a poor customer experience, when you get down to the root of it, it's really about a misunderstanding or someone, showing their frustration through a lack of information, a lack of communication, a lack of direction. So people want to be heard. And I think when you're operating within a franchise system and people have the ability to really impact the brand reputation, it has to be prioritized. Feedback loops have to be prioritized.
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of the elements that you say is, the ideal thing for an FAC. The other word I would add to it is a big part of FAC is clarity.
Yeah.
A lot of time, franchise partners believe that the franchisor is not very transparent in what's going on.
Do you agree? Do you agree that there's a lack of transparency usually on that side?
I won't say yay or nay, because different brands do different things. I've seen some that are super clear.
Yeah.
And the franchise partners love it, right? A big thing is about opening new units. Well, you've developed this Toronto market and I'm going to put 1-2 blocks from you. That conversation happens before it even opens, those types of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So clarity is a big part of that, and communications around that, and new innovation, right? So new innovations where they bring it to the franchise partner, and I'm going to go off topic for a little sideways for a little bit. And a good FAC should have segments, right? So people who are franchise partners who have been in the brand for a long time, for a little while, that are new, not just
reflective of the population.
Yes, absolutely. So when these things are happening and new innovations are coming, well, you're not talking to one segment, especially when it's a bigger brand, right?
Yes.
To one segment of your franchise partners, you're talking to all to really figure out how you're moving forward. Again, that's when it's working well.
Yeah.
Now, when it's not working out, franchisors are communicating, but they're more mandating, saying, this is what we're going to do. Here's the clarity. We are opening one in your area, maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah. Because we said so.
No, but really it's live or leave.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So those types of things. So that's why there's balances between what a franchisor who wants to work with franchise partners to develop the brand, and franchise partners who want to lead the brand, right?
Yeah.
In their way, right?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that example up.
The power.
Yeah.
That, and I don't even want to say abuse of power, because I know one thing is that an FAC is always for feedback.
Yes.
Feedback meaning the franchisor is still going to make
Has
that
the power to
decision.
make the decision. Absolutely.
Right. So,
Yeah.
which is not right or wrong, but
Yeah.
it's good to have the input from the franchise partners, and then you do what you will with it.
Yeah. And I mean, a franchise is successful because it's built on proven systems.
Correct.
And it's hard sometimes to convince people to take another look at those systems or change those systems or innovate those systems when, why can't I continue doing what I've always done when what I've done has always worked? Right. But again, when you take that proactive approach and just take the feedback in, you might uncover opportunities that you never knew existed. When you tap into your local communities, which is where your franchise partners live and exist and operate, you're able to add a perspective to the conversation and to the decision making that you might not have been able to uncover before.
Right.
And so whether it be through the FAC, whether it be through business coaches, whether it's through surveys that are sent out periodically over the course of the year, whether it's, providing feedback on how well or not well a promotion went, right? It gives people visibility, it gives people transparency, and that is what really helps build trust in those relationships.
Right. And just, I guess, tying it back into the question about who really holds the power, it's making sure that neither side is push or pull.
Yeah.
Right? It should be really a unified thing saying, these are our interests, these are the franchisor interests, even when they're
the brand
different.
interest.
Yeah, even when they're differing, to say, okay, this is what we want to talk about, communicate about moving the brand forward. So, and now just looping it back to tariffs. So tariffs can be a big win or a big one where the franchisor can say, this is our solution. You take it to the FAC, and you may have franchise partners on the FAC say, there's a better way of doing this. And then you have the communication, right? And then you can go forward with the best solution for all. So that's, for me, ideally how it should work, with a lot of communication going on.
Yeah, I always champion collaboration.
Yes.
That is, look at a way to come to a problem or find a solution in a way that feels like collaboration. Absolutely. Yeah, love it. So we'll do one more question.
Okay.